It is my nerd world and positively Star Wars. I am your host, Jon Justice, and I'm so glad you're with the show again this week. So some big changes came to my nerd world this week. Now that we've got January behind us in this new year, I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do with the future of my nerd world. Much of what I have planned is a bit limited because of the fact that I am a full-time radio talk show host. So I only have so many hours in the week, and I do need some free time between doing my full-time job, prepping the show on a weekly basis, daily, working on my science fiction novels, and of course the podcasting as well. But I do want to grow my nerd world, and so I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do with my nerd world and the shows that I'm putting out there, and I have figured out a way to sort of maximize the amount of work that I'm doing. So here's what you can expect from my nerd world moving forward, and all of this is subject to change, but this is where we're heading for right now. All right, so a couple of things sort of apart from Star Wars. I have brought back my Depeche Mode podcast, as I've mentioned many times on the show. If you list the things that are most important in my life, it goes God, my family, my wife, and my kids, and then the things in my life that fill me with joy, the things that I fill in my life that bring me joy. It's Star Wars, it's Depeche Mode, and it's NASCAR. So I am bringing back my Depeche Mode podcast, and that started this week. So if you're a fan of Depeche Mode, be sure to check that out. All the podcasts from my nerd world are going to continue to be coming out on the same feed. So if you get a podcast from my nerd world that you don't want to listen to, simply delete it and wait for the one you do want to listen to. On top of that, I am planning on doing some breaking news shows. These will be combination audio and video shows when some type of movie news breaks that I feel like talking about, especially if it's Star Wars related, but I'm not just only going to do Star Wars breaking news. You can expect that if some big news breaks that I'm interested in talking about, I will be providing some commentary, again, video on YouTube, and then also via the podcast, and that, of course, will pop up on your podcast feed wherever you listen to the show. The biggest change comes to Positively Star Wars, and for those that don't realize it or haven't realized it already, I'm basically taking the weekly show and I'm breaking it up into two shows. I wanted to pare down the main show, the show you're watching right now that has the audio version on the podcast and the video version up on YouTube. That was getting longer and longer than I wanted it to be, and I wasn't maximizing the space on YouTube specifically when it comes to the video portion of it, with the shows getting so long. So what I decided to do was split the show up between the main show, which you're watching right now, which will happen every single week. This will be where I talk about the news and my commentary surrounding all things Star Wars. But the listener feedback portion of the show, which I normally included on this show, is getting its separate podcast without video. I felt rather than be selective in the feedback that you give me in the comments on YouTube and the emails that you send to TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna split this up because it's basically the same amount of work for me. It doesn't take very much to just create two different podcasts. And since the listener feedback portion of the show is one where it doesn't really offer up as much as the regular show does, the sort of incentive for more visuals, I figured I'm going to leave that strictly as a podcast. And so you probably noticed that the first My Nerd World listener feedback show did pop up yesterday. It will be on YouTube as well, just in audio form, like the way that the regular show used to be. So when you respond to what you hear on this show, whether you're listening to it via the podcast or whether you're watching it on YouTube, your emails and your comments are going to be read on the listener feedback portion of the show. So there you go. So each week you're going to get two different shows. One's going to be audio only. That'll be listener feedback. Probably will be released on Thursday or Friday. And then the full show, which you're watching right now, which will still be in its form with the photos and the videos that go along with it and the regular podcast audio form, if that's what you're listening to. This show will continue to come out either on Saturday or Sunday. If you have any further commentary or suggestions beyond the changes that I'm making to my nerd world, please, by all means, feel free to drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. And I want to take just a moment and remind you as well that the mailing list for my nerd world is growing, and I did send out an update on all the changes being made to my nerd world, and when it comes to the EMBARK science fiction space opera series, the books that I'm writing. If you are not on the mailing list, all you got to do is email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and just say, hey, put me on the mailing list. You will not get any spam. I'm not selling it to anybody else, and the emails are kind of infrequent. Only when there's sort of big updates or I'm right about ready to go and launch the next book is when I start sending the emails out to promote it. So if you want to sort of know firsthand what's happening with my nerd world or with the EMBARK stories, again, drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and just say, hey, put me on the mailing list, and I will do just that. All right, let's go ahead and get into the show this week, and I want to start off with a kind of controversial topic. This is a little bit off the beaten path of what I've done before, but it's something that I feel I personally would like to address on the show, and I've been thinking about it for a while. I'm actually writing up an article that I hope to have published sometime in the next couple of months. My intention is to release the article around the same time when EMBARK Book 3, The Vanishing Ward, gets released here in the next couple of months as part of the pre-promotion for the book. I spend a lot of time on social networking, more than I wish that I had to be honest with you. If you were listening to listener feedback this week, I think it was Jen G had written that Twitter is a pool of commentary, and I couldn't agree more. I think there's a lot of good things that can come out of Twitter and social networking. Don't misunderstand, but there's a lot of bad and a lot of damage that's done out of Twitter as well. And there's also there's a lack of perspective, in my opinion, on Twitter, especially when it comes to Star Wars. And that's really what I want to focus on. It may sound a little controversial. At least I feel like it's a little bit controversial. But in my opinion, for Star Wars to thrive into the future, now that we've got the prequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy, right, finished with the release of The Rise of Skywalker, which I've seen 10 times now. Now that we've got that sort of out of the way, and we're looking ahead and waiting to find out what it is Disney and Lucasfilm are going to do when it comes to the theatrical releases, I feel like I don't feel like I know. I want to get this off my chest. And that is my opinion that for the franchise to thrive, and specifically the movies, the best thing that Disney and Lucasfilm could do would be to ignore the online fan base. And I'm going to explain myself on this because I think there's very much a loss of perspective. That's not to say that there isn't attention that can be drawn to Star Wars via the base, and that the creators of Star Wars won't pay attention to that. I think to a certain extent they do. They obviously, there's a lot of the individuals who are a part of the creative team, a part of the Disney and Lucasfilm story group. They're on Twitter. We know this. Pablo Hidalgo, Matt Martin, and the like. And I think in certain circumstances, there's positive things that can be done. I think the campaign for Make Solo 2 happen is a positive one. I don't think it is going to be impactful. I think if they do move forward with making a follow-up to Solo, whether it's another movie or more likely, in my opinion, a live-action TV show, I think that would have happened, in my opinion, anyways, regardless of any sort of internet campaign to make Solo 2 happen. Now, be that as it may, though, I don't think there's anything negative about doing that, right? Somebody could easily argue that maybe it was the fan freak out and the continued commentary from the fandom asking for the Clone Wars to return that may have played a hand in us getting Season 7 of the Clone Wars, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, and that'll debut on the Disney Plus app on the Disney Plus streaming service here in the next couple of weeks. But again, without Disney or Lucasfilm directly saying, yeah, it was only because of the fans that we did this, I'm kind of under the impression that they probably were planning on doing a season 7 of the Clone Wars anyways, even though when they announced it, it was, Clone Wars saved. I think that is a reaction to a minority portion of the fandom that was asking for this, saying, hey, we are going to do this. We know you've been talking about it. So why do I think that Disney and Lucasfilm should ignore the fans? This is why I think that they should ignore the fans. First off, let's provide a little bit of perspective. Twitter is really, really good at giving off a false impression. It may seem as if a particular hashtag campaign, regardless of what it is getting a lot of attention. If it's trending in your Twitter feed and you're thinking, oh my gosh, we're making headway, this is getting a ton of attention, regardless of what it is. And I don't want to point to any particular Star Wars hashtag Twitter campaign. I just want to speak overall. There's some things that I think people need to be reminded of. One, when it comes to trending topics on Twitter, those are user specific. And they're regional specific as well. And I know what I'm talking about with regard to this because we've done a lot of this and watched a lot of this with the full-time radio show. Myself, my co-host, our producer, we've had times when the hashtag TCNT, which is the hashtag that we use for our radio station, Twin Cities News Talk, and for the show, when it starts trending on Twitter, and it looks like, wow, look at all these people that are into the show and tweeting about it. It is a fraction of a minority. It's trending in our feeds because it is topical among the people that we follow. Because Twitter is very much designed to match the people that you follow, who is in your timeline. So you're going to see tweets and hashtags and trending topics that relate to the people that you follow and the topics and the interests that you have. Okay, so that's the first part of it. All of the Twitter handles out there have their own unique set of circumstances that determine what their trending topics are and the people they follow who are going to be retweeting and commenting on particular tweets. Okay. It gives off a perception that the whole world is talking about this when the complete opposite is true. If you were to take the whole world into account, or even just everybody on Twitter, it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. How do I know this? Because I've gone and looked at the data. The latest estimates are only 10% of the American public is actually on Twitter. And there's only a fraction of that 10% on Twitter that are even engaged in anything Star Wars. And there's only a fraction of that Star Wars engagement that is talking about, for example, the rise of Skywalker. Okay? So even if you have a hashtag Twitter campaign and it's trending and people are retweeting it and you're seeing it in your timeline and you're seeing it in your trending topics and you see 20 people have commented or retweeted on a particular tweet of you promoting something that you wish would happen, a future Star Wars film or a current Star Wars film, or asking for a special edition to be released or whatever, it looks like you've got all these people that have hopped on board your campaign. The reality is you don't. Now, let's talk a bit about the fandom and those that are actually making Star Wars money. The same thing can be said about YouTube as well, really quick. I mentioned YouTube with this too. YouTube, again, the Star Wars content on YouTube is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the overall content that you're going to go and find on YouTube. It may not look like that because your YouTube page and the algorithms have thrown up on the screen all of your interests. And if you're into Star Wars like me, you're going to see a lot of Star Wars topics on there. But that's not representative of the majority of people on YouTube. By the same token, the people that are listening to a lot of these shows, watching a lot of these shows, are individuals that are already engaged anyway. So it's the fandom talking to the fandom, not the fandom talking to the broader casual fans. And it's the broader casual fans that are making Star Wars all the money. You and I are not the individuals who are making Star Wars all the money. Now, you and I are the individuals that are the heart, right, of the fandom, because we're the hardcore of the hardcore fans. And we're the ones that are passionate enough, some of us, to go and want to see other things happen, or the ones that get really excited when something happens that was unexpected or that we wanted to see happen, or we get really upset when things didn't work out the way that we had hoped. But keep in mind, that's not the majority of the fans that are going out to the movies and making these movies the most money. The majority of the fans are the casual fans that are making Star Wars the most money. They're the ones going to the theater that have the bigger numbers than you and I do. If it was just the hardcore fandom, if it was just the individuals that were out there launching Twitter hashtag campaigns, Star Wars is doomed to fail because it wouldn't be enough to sustain the franchise. You need the casual fans out there. And the movies play to those casual fans. And I think that's why there's little changes that are made within the films where we kind of scratch our head and go, and I'm not saying me personally, I'm just saying these are arguments that I've heard. Individuals that say, well, why didn't they make the dagger in The Rise of Skywalker the Mortis dagger? Why are Wayfinders shaped like holocrons? Why not just call them holocrons? You could do those things, but there's going to be a segment, a majority segment of the movie-going audience that is going to be like, okay, I don't know what that means. So you're going to have to, as a storyteller, provide further explanation. Now, you can do that in a book. It's a lot harder to do that in a movie, right? So it's easier to just call it, hey, that's a Wayfinder. It looks like a holocron. We, as the hardcore fans, know that. But the casual viewer goes, Wayfinder. It's a thing that helps you find your way. Same thing when it comes to the Mortis dagger. I think there's a way that they could have wedged in the whole Mortis arc. And I imagine there's many of you even listening to this podcast on a weekly basis who may be scratching your head going, I have no idea what John's talking about right now, which is kind of making my point. The Mortis dagger comes from the Clone Wars Mortis arc, where you've got the father and then the brother and the sister, and they represent the light side and the dark side and the balance. And Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka go to this mysterious location out in the middle of space, and they get swept up in this story that involves this dagger, and I won't get into it all right now, but you can now understand why you can't really break this down in The Rise of Skywalker, because if you had called it the Mortis dagger, it would have been super confusing and really convoluted to have to get into why are they calling it the Mortis dagger. So we'll just call it a dagger, and we'll have it have some usefulness to it in this grand adventure. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into the Rise of Skywalker portion of the show. So, perspective. Perspective is skewed, in my opinion, when it comes to how effective these campaigns can be, and they are not representative of the majority of fans watching these films. And why is that important? That's important from the standpoint of we don't want to have content creators in Star Wars trying to make everybody happy. And this is what I really, really want to get into. And if you see me, if you're watching this on the video portion, I keep looking over because I have a bunch of notes here to make sure that I'm hitting all the points that I want to make. The campaigns on Twitter may be visible and may bring awareness to a particular thing within the fandom that people are talking about. And I think it's good for Disney and Lucasfilm to look at that, right, and take a look and see what people are talking about. But I personally don't believe the decision should be made moving forward based off of what we're seeing from a minority portion of the fandom. I certainly wouldn't have wanted that to happen in the wake of The Last Jedi, and I certainly wouldn't want it to happen in the wake of The Rise of Skywalker. I never in a million years thought we would have been walking away from Skywalker with the same level of controversy from the other side of the fandom that loved The Last Jedi, but that's where we are. And it's a really bizarre place to be in, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. Like I said before on the show, I think this is just the world that we live in right now. Okay, so your campaigns may be visible, not powerful. For me personally, and let me get to the heart of my point here, I want those that are creating Star Wars content to create the content that is most genuine and authentic to them. For example, and I've mentioned this before, but it's relevant to this topic. When I do the radio show that I do, Okay. It's a little different because I've got somebody else that I work with, so we kind of do this together. But it certainly was true when I did the show alone, when it was just the Jon Justice show for 9 years when I was working in Tucson, Arizona. I didn't pick topics to talk about that I thought the audience wanted to hear. I only picked the topics that were interesting to me. And the reason I only picked the topics that were interesting to me is because that is going to bring out the best commentary from me. If I'm talking about something that I don't feel like talking about, then it's not going to come out very interesting. I'm not going to be into it. I'm not going to be enthusiastic about it. I do the same thing with the Star Wars show that you're watching and listening to right now. For example, I didn't feel like talking about the Clone Wars trailer last week. It came out before the show was released. It's a big deal within the Star Wars fandom. 7th season of the Clone Wars coming to the Disney Plus streaming app. I didn't feel like talking about it at the time. I thought about talking about it, but at the time I was like, no, I'm excited for Clone Wars, but I have other things that I want to get to before that. There'll be, time to talk about it later on. Now, come to this week, I have things to talk about when it comes to the Clone Wars. I'm into it now. I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you shortly. I want the Star Wars creators to create content that they are into, that they are passionate about, because that's going to bring about the best quality content to the screen, because the individual behind it is going to be the most passionate about what they're doing. And you can apply this to so many different things. An artist, a painter. I don't think you want a painter painting something that they think is going to be appealing to everybody that sees their particular piece of art. No, they're going to create and use the canvas to create the thing that they want to see, that they're most passionate about. A really good example for those that are old enough to remember this. And this was a talent coach, Bill McMahon, that taught me this years ago. And it works and applies to so many different things, and certainly applies to Star Wars. Behind the music on VH1. Now, for those, VH1 used to actually play videos. VH1 and MTV actually played music videos. And VH1 was more of sort of an adult contemporary version of MTV. It was a little bit more adult-oriented. They had this amazing show called Behind the Music. And they would take one band and they would spend an hour talking about the history of that band with this narrator. And it was fascinating insight and things you'd never heard before from bands like Depeche Mode, for example, and Def Leppard, Milli Vanilli, Bad Company, Weird Al Yankovic, Ted Nugent, you name it. There were a whole bunch of bands that I didn't give a rip about, whose music I didn't even like. But man, that show was compelling. Why was it compelling? Because the creators that made it were really in to tell the story of this band. They were really in to talking about this particular group, and so they made it interesting. Think about when you're listening to something like this show. I think a big part of why people like this particular show, one is the positivity that I try to bring out in the show, but it's because I talk about the topics that I'm most passionate about. I guarantee you, if you're listening to the show at any point in time, talking about something and you're like, it doesn't seem like John's very into this, it's probably because I'm not adhering to my own advice of making sure that I only cover things that I'm most interested in. Hire creative talent and then let them go and tell the story that they want to tell. I honestly think that's part of the reason why in The Force Awakens, this is a really good example, but The Force Awakens, between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, I think for The Force Awakens, when J.J. Abrams went to go make that movie, there was a bit of we got to kind of check off a bunch of these boxes, and J.J. Abrams was kind of in this box. And while the movie did exceptionally well at the box office, I'm still convinced, and I won't get into it on this show, and I know my buddy Zach over on Knights of Vader is going to disagree with me, because he had another great show this past week talking about the box office numbers for The Rise of Skywalker. And, it's an interesting debate to have, but I still of the opinion that The Force Awakens overperformed, and that's not indicative of where the Star Wars franchise and the fan base actually is. I think a lot of extra people who are even lesser interested than the casual fan went out to go see The Force Awakens just because it was a brand new Star Wars movie, and that a lot of those people didn't come back for the sequel movies because they really weren't all that interested in Star Wars to begin with. That being said, that first movie in the sequel trilogy was a bit of, ticking off the boxes of what we're expecting in a Star Wars film, and let's try to hit all of these particular beats. And because of that, it's a little bit on the redundant side. What movie isn't like that? The Last Jedi. What movie, in my opinion, is a masterpiece loved by a lot of different people, although it's very controversial? The Last Jedi. Why is that? Because Rian Johnson had free reign to do what he wanted to do. Because Rian Johnson made that film, wrote that script while The Force Awakens was being shot before it was even released. So to me, The Last Jedi is the one movie of the modern Star Wars era that's most relatable to the original trilogy, because I think that George Lucas in the original trilogy and Lawrence Kasdan and the directors of films also were doing what they wanted to do and weren't necessarily listening to what the public at large and the fandom was saying, because we didn't really have a mechanism to do that at that point in time. You could write a letter, I guess, but how many people are writing letters to Lucasfilm? No, moving forward, right? I think the fans are important. I think the fans should be noticed, right? I'm sure that Disney and Lucasfilm are paying attention to online campaigns. Maybe it's good for ancillary material, books, okay? Maybe live-action TV shows or cartoon series, perhaps. I think that might be relevant. But when it comes to the larger films and the big money drivers for the franchise, and it really is going to be for the foreseeable future, the live-action portion of Star Wars. The theatrical releases into, for a little while, a lesser extent, not forever, the Disney Plus streaming app shows as well. Those need to be placed in the hands of good storytellers, and they need to be left alone to create and tell the stories that they want to tell. I actually think that with this commentary, there's a bit of an argument to be made that maybe not Benioff, but Lord and Miller should have stayed on to do Solo. I don't know all of the details. None of us do. We've all heard sort of the stories of what happened with those two. But there's a part of me that goes, I wonder if, and I love Solo, don't misunderstand, but I wonder if there was a missed opportunity for whatever reason and why they were pulled off for Solo. Because I think that Lord and Miller could have done something really, really special with that movie and could have done a little bit of what Rian Johnson had did. Now, I know that Lawrence Kasdan and Jon Kasdan, his son, they wrote the script. They wanted to adhere to it. The script was great. I get all that. That being said, and we'll never know, there might have been a missed opportunity. I think that the Colin Trevorrow one's a little bit different, right? Because I do think that Chris Terrio and J.J. Abrams did go and do what they authentically wanted to do, and I think that's also why we have a very divisive movie. And that's a good thing, in my opinion, especially the ending. I think that ending of that film is genuinely what Chris Terrio and J.J. Abrams wanted to do. There were obviously other options they could have gone with, but they decided to go with what they felt was best. And for me, those were the best choices. I know you don't agree, but they were the best choices. It's very similar to what happened with Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi and all the individuals that hated the way that Luke Skywalker was handled. For every person that hated the way that Luke Skywalker was handled in The Last Jedi, you've got a person standing next to them to go, I love the way that Luke Skywalker was portrayed in The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi is going to go down as one of the most talked about, if not the most talked about and controversial movie in all of Star Wars history at this point in time. And I also think that that history is going to be very positive in reflecting back on that film for being something different and genuine and authentic. I wouldn't have wanted another paint-by-numbers Empire Strikes Back any more than I would have wanted The Rise of Skywalker to be also a paint-by-numbers copy of Return of the Jedi. I love what J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio did. Now, there's one more part of this, and then we're going to move on to some of the other topics this week as it relates to some of the new content that's coming out. The last thing I want to talk about is when it comes to the sake of the Star Wars franchise and what, in my opinion, they need to do moving forward to protect this galaxy far, far away that we love so much. They got to clamp down on the leaks. This is not a dig by anybody that went and leaked anything at all, right? People are reporting leaks that are out there. Totally get it. You know, if they've got the information, they want to put it out there, that's on them. We can decide as fans whether or not to go and read it. But what Jedi Pax has put out, Making Star Wars put out, Bespin Bulletin put out, And again, this is not a dig on them, right? So don't misunderstand. Hear what I'm saying. It's not a dig on those individuals. They got the information. They put it out there. We as fans have to go and decide whether or not we want to read it. But in my opinion, that was incredibly detrimental and damaging to The Rise of Skywalker. Because that information was put out into the public, narratives and preconceived ideas and notions of what this movie was supposed to be before anybody stepped into the theater were cemented in people's minds. And for a lot of individuals, they could never go and escape that when they got into the theater. And that's a bummer, in my opinion. That's not how these movies are supposed to be given to us as a consumer, in my view. We shouldn't be getting all of the details. Like, I wouldn't want all the details of my EMBARK stories that I'm writing out into the public ahead of time. No, I want people to read my story, and for the mysteries that I write and the story that I craft and the twists and the turns that I want to see revealed over time, I want to see that done in a very organic and authentic way. And unfortunately, with those detailed leaks that came out that ended up being so incredibly accurate, a lot of people ended up forming these ideas in their head that they could never get away from, or they rejected the leaks outright and said they weren't true. That's never going to happen, which when it did happen, now they feel as if they've betrayed themselves, or that they've been lied to, or they were lying to themselves. It was so damaging. I honestly believe that if we hadn't had the extensive leaks for The Rise of Skywalker, we would have been having incredibly different stories, incredibly different commentary leading up to the movie, and I think the takeaway from the film would have been exponentially different. I think it was to that film's detriment. Now, I looked at those leaks. I'm not going to lie. I did. When I go see a Star Wars movie, it's a very, for as weird as it sounds, daunting experience. It's a stance in a situation where I want to take everything in and I want to watch it all because I'm so excited. Knowing a bit ahead of time what was going to happen in the movie made me enjoy that first screening of The Rise of Skywalker a little bit more, even though the reveals, for the most part, I was already aware of. Would I do it differently? I don't know. Will I do it differently in the future? I don't know. I just hope in the future that I don't have the ability to have to put that situation in front of myself, because I hope those leaks don't end up being released into the public. I really hope that's the case. So I hope that Disney and Lucasfilm are able to somehow get a grip on whatever it is that's causing all of these leaks to take place. I mean, for example, we didn't really know. We had some clue about a Yoda species being in The Mandalorian, but we didn't know the story of The Mandalorian at all. So whatever they needed to do to keep The Mandalorian, the lid on The Mandalorian, they need to do that for the future franchise movies, because if we end up getting a leaked synopsis in the same level of detail that we got for The Rise of Skywalker in whatever this next movie is supposed to be, which most likely is going to be in a different era with a brand new set of characters that we're not supposed to have any preconceived ideas about. If we end up getting a leak beforehand, it's gonna be a repeat of all of this over again, and that's gonna suck. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Leave a comment on YouTube if you'd like as well. Curious to get your thoughts. Look, I love what Disney and Lucasfilm are doing. And I actually think that what I've just laid out is actually how they're approaching things. There was a podcast, I want to say it was Empire Magazine, but I could be. There was an interview done with Chris McQuarrie, who did the last couple of Mission Impossible movies. And when he came back to do this latest one, Fallout, he almost wasn't going to come and do it. And I got together with and the studio had a bunch of data as it relates to the movie-going audience and who was going to see these movies and how it was changing and how the habits of people are changing. I think that also plays a big factor into, and I think Disney and Lucasfilm knows this, I think that also plays a big factor into the box office performance of The Rise of Skywalker. I don't think it's fair to judge the performance of the box office of The Rise of Skywalker, in my opinion, and I know my buddy Zach over at Knights of Vader is probably going to disagree with me. I don't think it's fair to look at the box office performance of The Rise of Skywalker with a critical lens without acknowledging the fact that movie-going habits are changing, and they've even changed since the time The Last Jedi came out. I think The Rise of Skywalker did very well. I don't know if Disney and Lucasfilm are disappointed because I don't know what their barometer is and I don't know what data they're looking at. There is an argument to be made that they could be looking at data as the movie-going audience is changing. A lot of people are waiting for movies to be released on streaming or home video before they go and see these films. And given the fact that the Disney Plus app came out right before The Rise of Skywalker, and I think a lot of people who were the casual Star Wars fans, right? The ones that went to go see The Force Awakens in the theater, but didn't go see The Last Jedi in the theater and waited for it to come out on home video. I bet that they did the same thing with The Rise of Skywalker, especially knowing that the Disney Plus streaming app was out there and they were going to purchase it and eventually it would land on the streaming app. So what does it matter to them if they have to wait 6 months before they go and see this movie? They're already paying for the Disney Plus streaming app. I don't know if Disney's looking at that data and how much that data contributes to the potential breakdown of what the box office is for The Rise of Skywalker. I think we'll get a pretty good idea when we see what the next slate of films are going to be and what their further plans are. That's my take on it, though. I don't care because I love these movies. I've seen The Rise of Skywalker 10 times. I'm still planning on going at least another 2 times in the theaters before it leaves the cinema. And I'm trying as hard as I can to not care about the box office. But it's tough because, you want the thing you love to succeed and do well, right? It's part of the reason why I brought my Depeche Mode podcast back, because they're being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I was very excited about that, and I wanted to talk about it. All right. So the Clone Wars trailer for Season 7 came out, and it looks fantastic. It really looks great. I'm super excited for Season 7 of the Clone Wars. However, I also realized that for whatever reason, I don't think that I ended up watching all of the other Clone Wars. We've been going through and rewatching the Clone Wars, and we're on Season 4 right now, and there are episodes that I don't ever saw. I'm shocked by that. I thought that I had, but I'm wondering, for me personally, if there was this time period where I ended up missing a whole season of Clone Wars for whatever reason. Because unless I just watched them once and I forgot about them since then. So I'm really excited for the next season of Clone Wars because I'm always excited for new Star Wars content. But at the same time, I kind of feel like I'm watching a bit of new Star Wars right now because I don't remember a handful of these episodes, which I feel really kind of ashamed about as being a massive Star Wars fan who's done hundreds of Star Wars podcasts. My biggest takeaway, though, from the Clone Wars and the return of Clone Wars and seeing the trailer for Clone Wars Season 7 is the potential for more live-action content along the same lines in terms of scope that we get with the Clone Wars. Clone Wars, in my opinion, make the prequels more enjoyable and relevant. And they're obviously really big in scope because it's a cartoon and you can do that. But to me, that gives me a desire to see that again in a live action form like we saw in the prequels, because it's a much different vibe, especially in terms of scope when it comes to the Mandalorian. Like, I don't know what Disney is going to do and how they're going to react to the success, and I'm curious of what they do to the success of the Mandalorian, right? I love the Mandalorian, but it's a very intimate, scaled down adventure. I would like to see that continue, right, in Season 2 because it's fun to watch and it's very much like the original trilogy, very much like A New Hope. So it's got all those same aesthetics and it brings back those nostalgia vibes, and the pacing of it is very much like A New Hope. But at the same time, I don't want to see all the other live action shows be like that. I hope with the Cassian Andor show that it is big in scope, that we get this grand adventure, this expansive post-prequel, pre-full Empire storytelling of this rebellion and spy network, and we're going to a lot of different planets, and we're seeing things on a bigger level. I want to see a live-action TV show on par with what we got with Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones, in my opinion, was incredibly expansive and big, and right, that's absolutely what I want to, what I'm hoping to see in a live-action TV show. I hope that they don't continue to try to duplicate what The Mandalorian does. And I think our best example of that's going to end up being the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, because that sort of lends itself to that smaller scale like The Mandalorian, and I'm very curious to see how they end up handling that so it doesn't feel too much like The Mandalorian feels right now. By the way, Ewan McGregor did come out and reconfirm that they will begin shooting sometime in 2021. He says that the date of the release of the show is still on target, and I was under the impression that was going to be late in 2021, so we'll see if that's the case, but it looks like the Obi-Wan Kenobi show is still a go. Quick thought on the season finale of Resistance, and again, sort of falling into that category of things that I wanted to wait to go and talk about. Look, I enjoyed Resistance. It certainly was geared towards a younger audience, so I really enjoyed it along with my son, from I'm watching Star Wars with my 13-year-old son aspect of it. I will say that the season finale of the show fell a little flat for me. I don't necessarily understand why Disney and Lucasfilm don't tie it in more. Like, we had a couple of direct tie-ins in Resistance to what was happening in the larger films, right? Especially with General Hux and seeing the speech that he did on Starkiller Base from The Force Awakens. But I would like to see more tie-ins. I really like what they did on the Lego All-Stars, where they actually have the Lego All-Star characters in the background of events that are taking place inside of the bigger movies. It looks like we're going to get a bit of that in the Clone Wars, which I'm excited about, because in the Clone Wars trailer, there's a couple of scenes that are scenes from a different perspective that were directly lifted from Revenge of the Sith. So that I'm really excited about. But I was expecting the end of this, and maybe my expectations were too high. I was expecting at the end of Resistance that we would end up getting some sort of direct connection to the start of The Rise of Skywalker, and we didn't end up getting that. So I was a little bit bummed out with regard to that. All right, so one more quick topic, and then we're going to wrap up the show for this week. Again, if you want to leave a comment on YouTube, please do so, or email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I will respond to your email on the Listener Feedback podcast next week. Lastly, The Rise of Skywalker is a really special movie, in my opinion, and we're going to get into more of this as the main topic on next week's show, but I think that this movie does a lot of bold things. I think that what J.J. Abrams said about him being inspired to take risks, the way Rian Johnson did, is absolutely true. I see the pacing and the editing of the film to be a bit experimental. Can we get away with this sort of rapid pacing at the beginning of the movie, which I have no issue with anymore, but on the first viewing, it seemed like it was moving really, really fast. But there's no portion of this movie where I want to get up and go to the bathroom. I love the whole thing. And I really dig the fact that it took an 80s-styled adventure, a la the Goonies or Indiana Jones and that type of storytelling, and they used it to finish off this incredible tale of the dyad of Rey and Ben Solo. I really love the way that it does that, where we get this fun adventure with these friends, but really what we're seeing is this story unfold before us to wrap up all 9 of these films. Looking at this as a singular trilogy, it is very unique. It is very different. And in my opinion, it does wrap up the entire saga perfectly. When I first saw the movie, I remember thinking that at the very end, I had an expectation that it would be a much grander, right, finale to this whole thing. And I remember the episode where I talked about this, the potential of Rey and Ben Solo and the Millennium Falcon flying off into the sunset, right? Or Lando going back to his home planet and Chewbacca going back to Kashyyyk and seeing where everybody ended up. And it didn't do that. It had an ending that was similar to the other endings that we got. The ending in Revenge of the Sith and the ending in Return of the Jedi. And on subsequent viewings, I finally realized, no, I actually like that. Because it's like the rest of the other movies. Star Wars, and I mentioned this on the listener feedback portion, it's not Lord of the Rings. It's not The Hunger Games.
It's not Harry Potter. It's Star Wars. And the ending of The Rise of Skywalker, to me, wrapped up this fantastic story of Rey Skywalker, her journey to becoming a full-fledged Jedi, this relationship that resulted in the redemption of Ben Solo, and a period put on the entire Skywalker saga in a way that matches perfectly the other two finales that we got in Return of the Jedi and Revenge of the Sith. And I really thought that it did that in a masterful way. I love this. I really love this movie. It has the potential. I'm really starting to think that I love it as much as I love The Last Jedi. I really am, for a bunch of different circumstances. And then I'm going to watch these films for different reasons. I'm very curious to see down the line when we've got some distance and the fans have calmed down and everybody's kind of rested in their opinions over this film, how the trilogy is perceived. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this on next week's show. We'll get into the totality of how the sequel trilogy in its narrative arc compares to the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy. And I hope you'll come back again next week and check it out. As always, if you want to support the show, I don't have a Patreon. I might do it one day, but I haven't done it yet. Nope. If you want to support the show, I hope that you'll take a moment. And I know that it's like you got things you want to do and stuff going on, but I really hope you'll stop and take a moment if you haven't done it already and head on over to Amazon.com and pick up either the ebook, the paperback, or the audiobook of my EMBARK science fiction space opera series. Set in the future on Earth, where a flight culture, air and space flight culture, has replaced car culture. We've got a hero in Taft Guardia who is longing for the girl Katha that he wants to be with. She receives a mysterious message from her deceased scientist father, which thrusts her and Taft and their friends into this mystery in the middle of when Earth is facing apocalypse, an industrial apocalypse. During the evacuation, as humanity heads for the stars, a corporate madman is seeking to exploit the situation, and Taft and his friends must now go figure out this mystery and a way to try to protect those escaping Earth as they head for the stars to find a new home. And that's just book 1. So you can pick up EMBARK book 1. Book 2, Treasure in Darkness, is also available. That continues the story of Taft, Katha, and their friends battling the evil Sint corporate madman Sint Argum. The Vanishing War, book 3, is coming out in the next couple of months. So again, if you want to support the show, go pick up a copy. And if you have a friend or a relative who's into science fiction, even if it's not Star Wars, I hope that you'll support the show by going and gifting them a copy. You can do that right there on the Amazon page. All right, you can go to mynerdworld.net for all things My Nerd World and positively Star Wars. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at the My Nerd World for all the ripping that I did on Twitter this week, at the My Nerd World, or my personal account at Jon Justice. You can also find me on Instagram at the Jon Justice, and you can find me on Facebook too under Jon Justice. Have yourself a fantastic week. Thanks for checking out the show this week, and I hope you'll come back for the next episode. Have a great one. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.